Now, you may be wondering why I am wearing Mean Girls the Musical merchandise to talk about 101 Dalmatians. I've decided this is the only other show in existence that you can wear fetch on your hat and it still makes sense. I'm going to give you a moment to work that one out for yourselves. Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is Mickey Jo. I'm a professional theatre critic here on social media. You may also be listening to this on podcast platforms. Hello to you. I feel compelled to let you know I am joined by a small and fluffy guest today. It's a plush Dalmatian that I bought at this evening's performance of 101 Dalmatians, which I just saw a few hours ago at the New Victoria Theatre in Woking, one of my favourite touring theatres, a theatre that I used to work at as an usher. Fun fact, bit of MickeyJoTheatre lore for you. Another piece of MickeyJoTheatre lore is that 2 summers ago, I saw, I guess, the world premiere production of this musical adaptation of 101 Dalmatians at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, a venue which, you know, in the years prior to that, had not been associated with any new musicals. Largely they are known for, like, Shakespeare and the occasional classic play and musical revivals. So that was a surprise. It was an even bigger surprise. The show, I'm sorry to say, was horrible. I reviewed this both here on my YouTube channel, where I said that I hated it, and for whatsonstage.com, where I said that I hated it with a little more professional nuance. Both of them, in any case, were 2-star reviews, and to cut an unnecessarily long story short, this press night happened on a Friday, which is unusual because it means that the newspaper reviews won't go to print until the Monday. They also won't be available online. Whatsonstage.com, being the intrepid folks that they are, published my review over the weekend, meaning mine was the first word released about 101 Dalmatians, and people were shocked and insulted to hear that it might not be the charming, lovely show everyone had been anticipating. I felt slightly vindicated when people went to go and see the thing and were like, oh, I see, I understand now. But it was a harrowing experience nonetheless. So I was not expecting to see this show returning for some time, and when it was announced that it would be coming back in a new touring production, I had mixed feelings about whether or not I even wanted to see it, because I feel like, to a certain extent, I was morbidly curious about how much had been changed, whether it had been improved at all, and what similarities, if any, this would bear to that original production. At the same time, I also thought, you know, is it in bad faith if I go to a show knowing that I hated it the last time around? Can I assume that I'm going to feel any differently about it this time? Well, the short answer is it got better. Did that mean it was good? I'll let you decide from today's review. We are going to be talking about the material, the performances, a lot of the design choices. I'm going to give you the briefest overview as to why I disliked that previous version so much, but that old review is still up on YouTube. If you want to go and check out me from 2 years ago, getting frustrated at some puppet dogs, you can go and watch that either before or after this review. I'm going to be giving you the update on the latest production. Yes, I am. That's right. I know. Podcast listeners, I was talking to the dog. And while I have you here, I have many more reviews and a lot more theatrical content, news coverage, hot takes, and vlog content coming very soon. In just a few short weeks, I am flying back to New York, where I plan to spend just over 2 weeks seeing as much theatre as possible. Make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube with the notifications turned on so you don't miss any of my upcoming content. Make sure you are following me on whatever podcast platform is your preference. You can also find more of my content over on TikTok, Instagram, and the app formerly known as Twitter, as well as Threads. I have been posting relentlessly these past few days. Finally, if you have already been to see this touring production of 101 Dalmatians, I'm catching it pretty late on in its life. Let us know what you thought in the comments section down below. We crave democratic theatrical feedback here on MickeyJoTheatre. But for now, I am going to tell you what I thought of the show. And for those of you who can see me right now, I am going to hold on to the dog the entire time, both because I think it's going to temper a certain amount of my passionate animosity, but also because I've been told I use my hands too much, and I feel like this will not stop that, but it will make it cuter. Anyway, here is what I thought of 101 Dalmatians, the musical, on tour. So a little bit of the context of this adaptation. I told you about the previous incarnation at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, but what this is a relatively new musical adaptation with music and lyrics by the actor Douglas Hodge, who, from what I can tell, prior to 101 Dalmatians, had never been a composer or lyricist previously, if I'm getting that wrong, and he'd done work that I didn't know about. You know, there's a lot of actors writing that's not always made hugely public, then I apologise. It has a book by Johnny McKnight, and this is based on an existing stage adaptation by Zinnie Harris, which in turn is based on the original novel by Dodie Smith, not based on the Disney animated film nor the live-action version. And in fact, Disney are in no way affiliated with this version of 101 Dalmatians. When it comes to Disney shows on stage, you have either the ones that they fully produce themselves and throw their weight behind, the likes of The Lion King and Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast. You also have some that are sort of licensed by them, but they're less heavily involved with. They kind of partnered with Sir Cameron Mackintosh on Mary Poppins, but then you have things like the more recent Bedknobs and Broomsticks tour, as well as that production of Pinocchio at the National Theatre. Disney are aware of those, and like they let them happen, but sort of a little more hands-off. This is separate to that again. This is just completely non-Disney, which means several components of the plot needed to be stayed away from, otherwise they would be infringing on copyright. In other words, anything that Disney came up with creatively for their film adaptation that wasn't present in the original book can't be utilized in this stage adaptation. So Pongo and Perdita, the dogs, have the same names, but the colors of their collars are switched. Their human owners have different names to the ones that you may remember. You are not going to hear the names Roger or Anita. And the professional connection to Cruella De Vil is swapped a little bit as well, because in this iteration here, it is Roger who is the fashion designer. I know, very progressive. In 2024, men can design high fashion and own Dalmatians if they want to, gosh darn it. But we still commence with this familiar meet cute after a little bit of a preamble where Pongo the dog is cruelly abandoned and rescued by an animal shelter, where one of the employees, a young woman named Danielle, falls so much in love with him that she has to take him home for herself. This is when the meet cute happens with the other dog owner named Tom. They meet in the park, their Dalmatians meet, the dogs fall in love, the humans fall in love. It's all a little bit unusual if you think too much about it, but it's very sweet on the surface, so it's in that realm that we're going to choose to stay. Then two different things happen at the same time. Tom gets an opportunity, in sort of a freelance capability, to work with Cruella De Vil, who is described in this version of the show as a lifestyle brand. That was not the case in Regent's Park, but I'm going to touch on that version momentarily. She's a lifestyle brand here as part of the House of De Vil, Hausdevil. And because he is charming and forgetful and bumbling, he has forgotten all of his designs when he shows up to this important meeting. But his partner Danielle has realized this and has chased after him with the designs and with the two dogs, who are immediately distrustful of Cruella because they can smell inherent malice, I guess. But Cruella can also immediately sense the other thing that has happened here in the plot at the same time, which is that Perdita is pregnant. And we, the audience, based on the title, if nothing else, know that she's pregnant with a hell of a lot of dogs. She is literally just so pregnant. I don't know if any other character in the history of musical theatre has ever been quite this pregnant. And with a few minor differences in the way that everything plays out in the second act, this is pretty much where we then head into familiar territory. They tell Cruella that she can't have the puppies even though she wants the puppies. She wants to turn them into clothes. I'm taking it as read, by the way, that everyone is familiar with the story of 101 Dalmatians. If you're not, then that sentence may have been very startling to you. Cruella wants to turn the puppies into, well, it's a coat. In previous incarnations, the coat is not explicitly mentioned here. It's just that she wants to, skin them and use their very soft, young, polka dot spotted puppy skin to turn into nice clothes. Yes, you were nearly going to be a belt. But after her offer to buy the puppies is turned down by the charming, young, dog-loving couple, she has her two bumbling comic relief assistants, who are her nephews in this version of the story, here named Casper and Jasper, as she has them abduct the puppies, which takes us into the second act, where we meet three of the puppies who have managed to escape and are trying to alert their parents to their location so they can help them free the rest of all of the puppies, both their siblings and a bunch of other Dalmatians as well. These aren't 101 that are all related to each other, they just all end up being in the same place. So that's the story in this version of the show, and that was largely the same at Regent's Park. I don't remember it well enough, honestly, I've blocked it out, to be able to articulate every detail about that version of the show, but I'm going to explain to you, before I tell you about how this one made improvements, some of the key mistakes, we'll say, made by the Regent's Park premiere version of this musical. The first had to do with the character of Cruella, who I think is really the most substantial character in this show, because we have this unusual thing where at the beginning of the show, it's the adult human characters who get very strongly established in their relationship, and we lose them completely in the second act. They are not important in the second act of this show. It becomes canine protagonist driven, and I'm all for that, but we have this very big switch in like who our focus is on. Cruella is really the only through line, and she's also, let's face it, the most iconic character from any version of 101 Dalmatians. If you ask someone to name a 101 Dalmatians character, she's the one they're going to tell you about. But at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, they had reconceived her in the modern day as an influencer. And I think what they really meant was social commentator, because they were going for this sort of vilified Katie Hopkins-esque thing, and we certainly see a lot of like irresponsible content creators, but it didn't really feel like they knew too much about the world that they were trying to emulate there. And rather than having her like long cigarette holder, she was smoking a vape the entire time. Another issue I had with that production was the design for the puppetry, specifically for the two adult dogs, because it was not dissimilar to some of the puppetry used in The Lion King, where the performer's own legs form part of the legs of the animals. So you had these puppeteers who had, I guess, like sticks puppeteering their front legs, and the dog was coming out from their midsection, and they were wearing polka dot striped trousers to form the back legs, except it just looked like adult humans stood up behind these dogs in a really inappropriate adult position. I'm going to let you, work out what I'm saying there without me saying it explicitly, but I don't think it was just me that was seeing that. That's what I need to say to you. The puppets for the puppies, the puppy puppets, if you will, were not that much better in that production, because they were just disembodied small heads that they were hand puppeteering, and if we were meant to find them cute, we didn't. We found them creepy. I also think, sadly, a lot of the classic charm of the story was lost by updating it from its original time period, and that is a factor also of this production, but they managed to rework that a little bit better here. Certainly at Regent's Park, you had the beauty that you always get there of being surrounded by trees, so when they're having walks in the park, that felt a lot more at home there, but something just wasn't quite as fun about seeing a 101 Dalmatians story taking place in the 2020s. But enough of the past, let's talk about this new production and some of the positive changes that they have made. So let me begin by talking about the improvements to some of those specific areas. Cruella De Vil is no longer framed as an influencer. She is more of a recognizable version of the character rather than trying to reconceive her in a modern context. And she is, as she has been before, this figurehead of a fashion house, and she is obsessed from the off with animal skin. This is not a realization that she has at any point during the plot. By the time we meet her, she is already wearing a giraffe on this very ostentatious, slightly futuristic outfit. I wasn't thrilled about that outfit choice, certainly in the first act. If that's something they want to have her wearing in the second act, when she has like gone further down the rabbit hole of mania and is turning into a supervillain, and she wants to wear this dark, like Jodie Jetson drag knight, knee-high boots over pleather leggings, giant cowl cape thing with a giraffe belt. If they want to have her wear that when she's turning into an actual comic book supervillain in the second act, then fine. But it's an odd way for her to arrive at the very beginning when you just want Cruella to look a little bit more classic. Just give us like a big red coat, or if they want to play on the whole giraffe thing, because moments before her entrance there's this radio announcement that a giraffe has gone missing from the zoo, obviously preempting the idea that it's been poached by Cruella, who has turned it into fashion. Then I would prefer for her to come out in a slightly more classic silhouette, but one with a super campy design. For example, like I wanted her to look like the Shania Twain look from the That Don't Impress Me Much video, where she is head to toe in animal print, but it's giraffe. That I thought would have been funny. And on the subject of the giraffe, I can't take credit for this because this was my fiancée Aaron's point. Well made, I thought. But it does kind of step on the inherent tension of her ability to abduct and skin the puppies if she's already stolen a giraffe. Like immediately it kind of makes it seem like she's not going to have any trouble dog napping all of the puppies because, a giraffe seems a lot more challenging. We also, and I know I said I was going to talk about positives, but I'm getting sidetracked here. We also don't really get much of an impetus because of that. Like, she's wearing this giraffe stuff, and she sings this song like, I'm an animal lover, like, I need to wear animals constantly, and that's my whole thing. It seems like this is just another project for her, and it's not the be-all and end-all. And given, like, how hard she goes in on this Dalmatian thing, we need to know that she is driven, that she is determined, that this is like the most important thing to her. She's gonna get these puppies. She is all about these puppies. She's not gonna move on to a rare exotic bird the next week if the puppy thing goes down the drain. Anyway, more improvements. Let's talk about the puppy puppets and all of the dog puppets. So the Dalmatians are now standalone Dalmatian puppets that are really expressive. Their mouths are puppeteered when they speak. Yes, the Dalmatians speak. They can't be perceived by humans, but they can understand each other. It's a very important fixture of the plot. And the puppies are just smaller versions of that. I like the way that the ensemble and the company are dressed when they are puppeteering and portraying the canine characters. I think that's very stylish and works very well in the same way that we've seen it work recently in the likes of like Winnie the Pooh on stage, but also probably going back to Warhorse, where they're wearing these monochrome costumes and the eye is drawn to the puppet, but it still allows the performer to perform. Huge improvement on the puppet front. I will say, I came under a little bit of criticism for trying to count the puppies at the Regent's Park version, and I'd do it again. I don't care. But I think I only counted like mid-90s, and that annoyed me more because I was like, they were so close, but there definitely were never 101 on that stage at the same time. There is a moment towards the end of this. For the most part, you just don't see that many puppies simultaneously in this. When they're newly born, you see the correct number as very small newly born puppies, which is very sweet. But right towards the end, when they like have loads of puppies, there can't be more than 70. I had to estimate because you can't quite make all of them out at the same time, but there cannot be more than 70 puppies. I call not 101. And I appreciate not everyone cares about that. I don't even really care about that. But if that is a factor for you in considering your enjoyment of this production, I'm saying it right here, right now. There are not 101 Dalmatians on that stage. Now, the puppetry designer and director was Jimmy Grimes, who I thought did a fantastic job. The costume designer was Sarah McCarday, and the set designer was David Woodhead. And I did enjoy all of the design elements because even though this production was also updated to a modern day context, a lot of the design of it allowed it to look a little bit classic. A lot of our locations still looked classic. They weren't obviously contemporary the way the characters were dressed. They were still sort of looking quirky and a little bit vintagey. All of which begs the question, why does it need to be taking place in the modern day at all? And you wouldn't notice it if it wasn't for a few references here and there that honestly the script doesn't need, because I found them a little bit cringe-inducing. These were some of the places where it started to feel a little bit like pantomime, and that was my overall impression of this version of the show, is that it felt like a pantomime interpretation of 101 Dalmatians, in the same way that when you go and see a Cinderella pantomime or a Sleeping Beauty pantomime, it is familiar enough of like the general landmarks of the plot, but the details are different. That's what seeing this is going to feel like to anyone who is familiar with either the Disney animated or live action film versions. But beyond that as well, it has a similar kind of a sensibility because it's playing to a very young audience, and there is nothing wrong with writing big commercial musical theatre for the younger end of the family audience spectrum. My preference is something that can play really well to young audiences, but something that is not afraid to be smart and sophisticated at the same time. Matilda does this brilliantly. Like, kids love Matilda, but it really appeals to an adult audience as well because it's intelligent, it's not necessarily patronizing. This feels very much dumbed down, and, you know, the kids in the audience were quite evidently the ones taking the most from this. And that's still a good thing. I have to acknowledge that as part of this review. I wasn't laughing along with this show, but there were a lot of gags that the kids were really laughing at, that they thought were hilarious. And that ultimately is a tick in the positive column. But the music is a little bit generic. It is not complex. The lyrics are a little derivative, a little repetitive. They tell us what they need to. They skip right to the most obvious sentiment When Pongo the dog is abandoned immediately, his first reaction to that is not one of surprise or heartbreak. He just begins singing "Take Me Home, Please Take Me Home," pleading for the next owner to take him home. Like, he moves on incredibly quickly and just starts focusing on survival, which, you know, good for him. This then gets reprised a whole bunch of times in a lot of different contexts, when we see dogs at an animal rescue, and then with the dogs later on after being captured, which is smart. There's a smart use of the same refrain, but there's not a lot of memorable tunes or lyrics in the thing. Overall, I feel like this is a show that has become a lot more tame, a lot less crazed and out there than the original production was, and what that boils down to is something that is quite generic, something that is safer, something that's a little more juvenile, a little bit more pedestrian. It's better. I'm not going to say that, like, it's less creative. I don't think that's the thing. I think it's just not insane like the last one was. It's more recognizably 101 Dalmatians. It has charm, it has sweetness, it plays very well to a young audience. It just doesn't really affect you emotionally nor compel you intellectually. It's not engaging enough. It does have this weird gear shift from the first act to the second because our protagonists change, because so much of the expositional time of this show is spent introducing us to these adult characters who, after the first third, we really don't spend much more time with, nor do they really matter. It's almost as though that entire introductory section should be much more driven from the canine perspective, rather than allowing them to feel like a secondary feature of it. And when we meet the puppy characters in the second act, those are great, those are really compelling. They delight the young audience completely, and some of the best sequences we have are shared entirely between dogs on stage. My favourite moment in the entire thing is the Twilight barking moment, where a cat has helped the puppies to go up onto the roof and is teaching them how to bark and send a message to their parents. This is communicated via a series of different dogs, a whole bunch of different breeds. Different clever puppets appear across the stage, at the back of the stage, in this moon. They appear in the auditorium. I loved that. That brought a huge smile to my face. So I guess just more dogs is what I'm advocating for here in this musical. In terms of the evolution of the score from the previous iteration of the show to this one, I do think that there has been a lot of change. I remembered songs like Bury That Bone and Litterbugs, that's the one that sounds like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and Cruella's Act 1 finale has a different title, and I think it's been heavily reworked, but the ending section felt familiar. It's now called Bring Me Fur, and I think it was called For Fur or Für Fur, like in German with an umlaut, or For the Love of Fur or something like that before. A lot of the songs are a little short and inconsequential, particularly for Cruella. You know, you want her to have a series of really great diva villain moments, and she doesn't really get that, nor does the direction by Bill Buckhurst, which I think does offer an awful lot of charm and like very slick storytelling, but nor does it particularly afford her the diva status and the grandeur and the drama that I think she deserves as this pantomime villain-esque take on the character. Her initial entrance is a little bit of an anticlimax, and she swaps between these two different outfits, one of them looking like Judy Jetson drag queen, the other one being kind of a very similar version of that, but with like the camel hump equivalent of shoulder pads covered in, I guess, the fur of King Kong. But while I feel like there really aren't that many essentials that you have to hit with 101 Dalmatians musical stage adaptation, one of them is like the love between these human characters and their dogs. Another is like the desperation of the dogs to get their kids back, conveying the different personalities of all these dogs and the younger puppies, but a big one is the grandeur and the diva attitude of Cruella De Vil, which I feel leads us pretty seamlessly into talking about performances, so that's what we're going to discuss next, the cast of this particular version of the show. Now, I say this particular version, I don't just mean this production, I mean this particular run at the New Victoria Theatre in Woking, because the role of Cruella De Vil is being played by multiple performers, depending on where you see the show. Kym Marsh is playing it in Woking. I thought she did a really great job. She was giving you diva, she was giving you drama, she was giving you very quick to anger, and she has a moment in the second act where she gets I guess poisoned, actually, and she has this sort of an animalistic transformation where she becomes a little bit more bestial and she can suddenly smell puppies, and we see her dial up the mania, which is what you want from a late-stage Cruella De Vil, but I thought there was room for her to have even more of her own personality. It's never going to be a Glenn Close, but it did feel a little bit like generic pantomime villainess, like she could have been giving us a queen rat from Dick Whittington, she could have been giving us an evil queen from Snow White. The characterization would have been the same. She's just annoyed that she's not getting her way, and that's really all that we had. She sounded great when she was singing, it's not a surprise, that is her background, but there was not enough substance in those songs. I wanted her to really, not to accidental pun, but to park and bark and get to sing something really meaty. I do also still resent a lot of the needlessly contemporary language that they have shoehorned into the thing, like when she says at one point to her henchmen that she's feeling triggered. That's an eye roll from me. We don't need to put that into 101 Dalmatians. Again, that makes it feel like a pantomime, that you're trying to pander to a modern audience and you don't trust your own material. Trust the material, trust the puppies. Speaking of the puppies, I have beef here because the performers playing the 3 puppy characters are just credited as ensemble, and not that that's anything to frown about, but Pongo and Purdy's portrayers get credited in this program, and so I think it was Ross Dorrington who was playing one of them. He was playing Patch, I believe. I'm literally trying to put the rest together just from these headshots, and I think it was Hugo Roland who was playing another of the 3, and I think Jasmine Triardi as well must have been playing Button, I think was the other one. They were terrific. They gave perhaps my favourite performances in the show. We got those characterizations so clearly. Our introduction to them as characters was a little bit lost among, you know, the birthing of just over a dozen different puppies who all got named very quickly. That's why I can't recall the names of each individual one, but their characters came across brilliantly. They were very wonderfully portrayed, as were their canine parents, honestly. Linford Johnson was puppeteering and voicing Pongo. Where's your dog wife? Where's your dog wife? Where's your dog wife? Emma Thornett. There you go. Emma Thornett. A really moving performance as Purdy, because she has this beautiful maternal moment of near grief in the second act. Now, I enjoyed Jesse Elland and Samuel Thomas as the humans, Danielle and Tom. I thought their coming together and their falling in love was very charming, and you really believed how deeply they cared about the dogs, and like when the puppies were being born, that was all lovely. They are also kind of thin caricatures and kind of two-dimensional when you get into it. And you know, they're dismayed when the puppies are lost. They are thereafter incredibly ineffectual. There's one odd direction moment, I will say this, when they are despondent about the dogs being lost. And this is a spoiler for the very end of the show, but we kind of know where this is going. They're sat on the sofa being like miserable. They think they're never going to see the dogs again, and then all the dogs are coming back. In fact, all 101 of the dogs, some of which aren't even theirs, are like coming up the stairs or like racing towards the front door. And so Danielle says, "Can you hear that?" She goes to open the door, presumably sees them, and then closes it so that she can say to Tom, it's something along the lines of like, "You're not going to believe this." And he says, "What?" And then she opens it again. And if you're that, like, if you're a dog owner and you're missing your dogs that badly and they're all running towards you and you open the door, you're not going to close it again just to deliver the line in a theatrical. I stopped believing it at that point. Again, I know I care too much, but we can still, like, it's important for them to be effervescently loving these dogs. That's who these characters are. That's all they have. So they need to have that wholeheartedly. It's a silly little note, but it's things like that that pierce the reality of their characters, and they just become eccentrics. And Sam Thomas played that eccentricity very well. He is this bumbling, nervous, anxious guy who wants to be a fashion designer, and so he had slightly more within his characterization to play. She just really likes dogs, and she's a bit lonely at the beginning, but thereafter isn't. Of course, our principal comic relief comes from Cruella's bumbling henchmen, played by Danny Hendricks and the wonderful Charles Brunton. They have a lovely rapport together, and they find these distinct comic characterizations that I appreciate very much. Again, they're like pantomime characters, and a lot of the lines that they have are a little bit cringy, but I think they also play very well to a family and to a child audience. And more importantly, they are committed. They are wholeheartedly committed to the bit every moment that they are on stage. They wear their hearts on their sleeves. They're these wonderful, slightly Disney-esque, cartoon familiar villainous sidekick characters who are so charming from the beginning that you can't resent or dislike them. Lovable fools, the both. But those are my updated thoughts about the updated production of 101 Dalmatians. Like I said, this is certifiably an improvement on the original version. They have taken what was a very wacky adaptation of 101 Dalmatians and they have refined it necessarily so that it can play to an audience and not leave them entirely baffled. There's this lovely, the heartwarming moment at the end of the show. Again, this is a spoiler. They did this at Regent's Park as well, and I'd forgotten until they did it again tonight, and I was like, oh yeah, it's emotionally manipulative, but it works because they bring on a real live Dalmatian dog puppy that they're carrying in their arms, and everyone goes, oh my gosh, it's the best moment of the show, which, which is lovely, but it's also a kind of a damning indictment on the rest of the show. And you start to realize, oh, that's what feeling something feels like. Because even when a puppy, again, big spoiler alert here, is dying from exhaustion because they are the smallest, they are the runt of the litter, and it's cold out and they're freezing to death while their parents will them to come back to life, but also wrestle with needing to go and race against the clock to save the rest of their 12 puppies. The scene and the lyric are both so emotionally obvious that they don't really affect us as much as they ought to. And that's true of much of this show. Like I said, it's just that little bit too generic, a little bit juvenile. I don't think I need to go and see 101 Dalmatians, the musical, this version of the show on stage, ever again, necessarily. I wonder what a version with Disney's weight behind it might have looked like in the years after The Lion King, maybe as another co-production with Sir Cameron Mackintosh, because it's a very British feeling story and it always has been, but that's something that we would have enjoyed 20 years ago, and it feels like the time for that has passed. For this one, I don't know what it's going to go on to, maybe something with youth groups. I don't even know if this is a show for Amdram, because a lot of the material that Amdram groups like to produce is honestly better and stronger than this, and I don't know that they would find it particularly compelling to perform. Which is not to say that I don't think 101 Dalmatians the musical should ever be produced or performed again. I think there is a place somewhere in the world for almost every piece of theatre. I just don't think this is a show that I, in good conscience, need to go and see ever again in my lifetime. Like I said, better than the Regent's Park one, still not great. And that is everything that Spotty and I have to say about it for this evening. Did you agree with me? You go, well, you're too close to the show, you're licensed merchandise, it's inappropriate for you to say. But those have been my thoughts, and I would love to hear yours as well. Feel free to comment down below if you have seen this production on tour, and I expect that a lot of people who have seen it have enjoyed it more than I have had a more charmed experience and thought it was lovely, and there is a lot to appreciate about it. A lot of careful creativity, a lot of hard-working performances have gone into making this show, just like there is in almost every piece of theatre, so do feel free to let me know what you loved about this in the comments section. In the meantime, thank you for watching or listening to this review. Make sure you are following me or subscribing wherever you are seeing or hearing it. Make sure you go and find me across the internet. I have so much content coming over the next month or so. I can't even begin to tell you, but I am very excited to share it all with you. And I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. Bye-bye. Wave bye-bye. Bye-bye. For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!